Okay, okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think we should start. I'm told that I should tell you to switch off your mobiles because we are going to be very serious here. Serious business about Mandela. It is indeed my privilege to welcome you to the 8th Nelson Mandela Lecture in this particular institute. Indeed, a space that has long been a hub for dialogue, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Tonight, we gather not only to honor the life of Nelson Mandela, but to reflect on the enduring relevance of his values, which are justice, compassion, humility, and peace. In our fractured world, this year's theme, as declared by the South African government, is as follows. It is still in our hands to combat poverty and inequality. It is a call to action that reminds us that Mandela's legacy is not confined to history. It is a living challenge to each one of us. As we move through tonight's program, let us remember that Mandela was not only a statesman, but a symbol of ethical resistance, a man who taught us that reconciliation is not weakness, but wisdom. With these words, I would like to invite, once again, like I did last year, our young girls and boys from Bluebells to do what they are good at and render some items. Please, come over to the floor. Come up front, come in front. Come in the front. Come in the front. Come in the front. Don't fall. Come right across. Come.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed an honor for us to be here this evening at the Indian International Center, gathered in the spirit of peace, justice, and humanity, values that Nelson Mandela not only believed in, but lived by. Mandela Day is not just a celebration of one man's life, but a global call to action, to inspire change, to serve others, and to carry forward the ideals of equality and dignity.
Every year, our school feels privileged to be a part of this commemoration. It's more than a program. It's a promise to remember that courage, compassion, and conviction must not remain confined to the history books. In our school, the South Africa Club has taken this vision to heart. It's a student-led initiative dedicated to learning from South Africa's past and championing justice and diversity in the present. Through dialogues, activities, and outreach, the club stands as a living tribute to Mandela's legacy.
Tonight, our young voices come together in song to honor a legacy that continues to echo around the world. We begin with the spirited South African freedom song, Welele. Rhythmic, joyful, and rooted in resistance, this piece celebrates resilience in the face of oppression.
Following that, our choir will present We Shall Overcome, a song that bridges continents and causes. Originally a gospel tune, it became an anthem of hope during the American Civil Rights Movement and resonates deeply with Mandela's own long walk to freedom. We conclude with the national anthems of both nations, a reminder that the fight for freedom, dignity, and human rights is not bounded by geography. It is universal. It is timeless.
As we listen, may we not only remember Mandela's words, but strive to live them. What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others. We thank IIC for giving us this opportunity, and we dedicate this evening's offering to the enduring spirit of Madiba.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall live in peace someday. And we shall live in peace someday. That we shall live in peace someday.
I request everyone to rise for the national anthems of the two countries.
Sikelela, Tina, Lusabulwayo, Murena Buluka, Seshava Saresu, O Fedi Seditwale Mashenye, O Sibuluke, Sibuluke, Sishabasa, Yesu, Sishabasa, South Africa, South Africa. I did love on say, I did beat on sea. Who said we let them back? What you can't say I'm fully. Sounds the call to come together, and united we shall stand. Let us live and strive for freedom in South Africa, our land. विनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल गंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जल वितरंगा तब शुभ नामे जागे तब शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तब जय गाथा जन गण मंगल नायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे।
Thank you. Wow, 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 wow. What a beautiful renditions. Dr. Borker, I think next time they need to translate that Zulu, song, because it's quite deep. It reminds me of our struggle in South Africa. It's a wake-up call to the people to stand up and fight against apartheid. At this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call upon to the stage Mr. Crowley, our Deputy High Commissioner, to felicitate our guest speakers. Please. Careful, careful. No, that's it, that's it, that's it. Thank you very much. In South Africa, we do that at the end of the program. So here, you do it differently. Yeah, we do it at the beginning. So in South Africa, you work and get paid. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We shall then move and call upon the host to say a few words about this particular event that we're celebrating today. But before I do that, I want to introduce him, say a few words about the work that he has done with South Africa. As you all know, Dr. Suhas Borker is a broadcaster and activist. He founded a Citizen First TV in 1981. He's a founder of many things, so I won't mention all of them. I think what is important is to say a few words about his connection to South Africa. He was inducted in 1987 into anti-apartheid movement at the International Media Conference in support of anti-apartheid. Struggle in South Africa, New Delhi, organized by media under the leadership of veteran journalist Nikhil Chakravarti. In 2012, he was invited by the ANC to address the plenary of the Third International Solidarity Conference in Pretoria. Dr. Borker, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening. Madiba Tujhe Salam. Program Director Sedula Mamabolo, Deputy High Commissioner Cedric Crowley, His Excellency High Commissioner of South Africa Anil Sooklal, who shall be joining us shortly, my friend Anand Grover, human rights jurist and senior advocate of the Supreme Court, who shall deliver the 8th Mandela Annual Lecture today, my young friends of Bluebells International who beautifully presented the national anthems of India and South Africa, my fellow members of IIC and the Working Group on Alternative Strategies. Like every year, on July 18 this morning, to school children drawn from schools all across the national capital region of Delhi gathered at India International Center to celebrate the birthday of Madiba. That they have done for many years, and the response was overwhelming today. This whole house was full, children were standing. There were around 300 students in a capacity of a hall which takes 230. We had songs, we had music, we had films, we had an exhibition of paintings from Bluebell School International, and setting the mood was the procession from the Gandhi King Memorial Plaza to the Deshmukh Auditorium, where you're sitting with Indian and South African colors and the joyous hails of Madiba Tujhe Salam. The 3 school choir groups from Bluebell School International, Manthan School, Noida, and Deepale were outstanding. They sang with fervor and passion. The theme for today's meeting in the morning was taken from Madiba's writing. We call it the Mandela Katha Mala. And the Katha theme was, I quote, "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes from more naturally to the human heart than its opposite." This was taken from his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, published in 1994. In the interactive session which followed, we discussed and talked about why Madiba is a role model for us in India. As we face divisiveness, as we face hate speech, as we face hatred generally around us, Nelson Mandela is a role model for several reasons. Because he is rooted in his actions, in his character, and his impact. Firstly, we have the resilience and courage of the man. Mandela endured 27 years in prison under harsh conditions of the anti-apartheid regime, yet emerged without bitterness, focusing on reconciliation. His perseverance inspires us to face adversity with strength. Secondly, his commitment to equality. He fought against South Africa's apartheid regime, advocating for racial equality and justice. His leadership in dismantling institutionalized racism shows dedication to fairness and human rights. Thirdly, forgiveness and reconciliation. As South Africa's first black president, Mandela prioritized unity over revenge, establishing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to heal the nation's wounds. This approach exemplifies forgiveness and bridge building. Fourthly, his leadership and humility. He led with empathy, He led with the inclusivity and a focus on collective progress, stepping down after one term and not sticking to his chair to ensure democratic principles. His humility and service-oriented leadership inspires ethical governance. His global influence is also remarkable. Mandela's advocacy of peace, education, and HIV/AIDS awareness, which Anand probably will talk about, extended beyond South Africa. Lastly, his life demonstrates how one person's moral conviction and actions can transform a society, making him a universal figure of inspirations. Madiba tujhe salam. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Borker, for those beautiful words about our former president, Nelson Mandela. At this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, Shri Anand Gruver, a distinguished human rights lawyer and senior advocate of the Supreme Court of India. He is internationally recognized for his pioneering legal activism in the fields of public health, AIDS, HIV, and LGBTQ rights. He served as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on rights, on the right of health from 2008 to 2014, and is a founding member of the Lawyers Collective, an organization devoted to advancing social justice and legal empowerment. He led landmark cases such as NAS Foundation, challenge to Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, and the legal battle against Novartis that protected access to affordable medicines for cancer patients. His work has shaped both Indian jurisprudence and global human rights discourse. We are indeed privileged to welcome Shri Gruver as he shares his reflections on the legacy of Nelson Mandela and the ongoing struggle for justice. The floor is yours, sir.
Good evening to all of you. Thanks for those laudatory remarks. Whether they're deserved or not is another issue. I was told in the evening, since you put it online, we won't be coming physically. So there are lots of people watching online. I want to thank His Excellency the High Commissioner and other members of the High Commission of South Africa, Cedric Kroll, Sedula Mambola, and Mr. Borker, my friend. He's on the working group on alternative strategies, to invite me to deliver this annual Nelson Mandela Lecture this year. It is indeed a great honor and pleasure for me to do so. Mandela, as Borkerji had mentioned, has left a great legacy of enormous contemporary relevance, particularly how he dealt with a number of issues, including the issue of whether the oppressed people can resort to violence to liberate themselves, or the pluralism issue, which he referred to, reverberates internationally and nationally in each country in diverse forms. As you know, South Africa in the early part of the last century was a society of diverse racial ethnic communities, comprising on the one hand Africans, the vast majority, Indians, and the so-called colored, really mixed population, all being the oppressed people on the one hand, and on the other were the whites, Afrikaners from Holland, and the English, the oppressors. It was a highly racialized society where the whites not only completely wielded political power, absolutely, but also owned the vast wealth in society, particularly in the form of land, traditionally owned by Africans, but forcibly taken from them by white settlers beginning in the 17th century and continued in the 20th century by legislative measures. And by 1994, when the liberation movement succeeded, black people were restricted to 13% of the total land of South Africa. South Africa was divided along racial lines. Racial mixing was not permissible. Under law, there were designated areas for whites and non-whites. Non-whites could not transgress into white areas without having a pass. All spheres of society were racially divided. This was the apartheid regime. It is in this context Mandela was born, or Madiba as he affectionately is known, in a small village in the Transkei province of South Africa. He was part of the royal family of the Tembu, or the, I have to say, Xhosa. Very difficult to pronounce that phrase. I learned a bit of that in England with my South African friends, Xhosa. His father was a chief of their tribe. He was brought up to be the advisor of the chief. But he actually says, my heart told me that I was a Tembu and I had been raised and sent to school so that I could play a special role in perpetuating the chief. But my head told me that it was the right of every man to plan his own future as he pleased and choose his own role in life. And choose he did. He moved to Johannesburg to pursue a career in law. I'm glad lots of lawyers are here. They should also be inspired by Madiba. And also my gym friends are here. I'll tell you that Madiba was actually a very fit sports person. So I'm glad my friends from the gym are here. He moved to Johannesburg to pursue a career in law. He began his law practice in Johannesburg with a law firm, Witkin, Sidelsky and Eidelman, where he had his first brush with politics through the association with one Mr. Gore. Mandela marched with Gore and thousands of others to support a boycott on the price rise of bus fares. Interestingly, he was told by one of the partners, please note lawyers, that if he wanted to be a lawyer, he should not indulge in politics. That's not the case in India. One of the first issues I want to address is how Mandela or Madiba viewed violence, whether it was justifiable ethically by the oppressed people of South Africa seeking liberation from oppression against the oppressors. In India, we've had a rich history of how violence has been used, treated, whether it's justified, ethical or otherwise. The earliest pronunciation of this in India is, of course, Buddhism. Ahimsa, based on the notion that all lives and living beings are interconnected, whether they're human, animal, or otherwise, is the central principle. Emperor Ashoka, who after witnessing bloodshed caused by the Kalinga War waged by him, which resulted in deaths of thousands, embraced Buddhism, and with it Ahimsa. His famous edicts remain engraved on the pillars across India. Ahimsa is also a fundamental principle in the Jain religion. It preaches ahimsa to all living things, whether human, animal, or plant, including the tiniest of organisms, whether by action or word or thought. It is rooted in the belief that all living things have a soul and are equal. The well-known American philosopher Martha Nussbaum names three great personalities of the last century who based their struggle for liberation on non-violence. What she calls non-anger as opposed to anger. Mahatma Gandhi and his non-cooperation movement, Martin Luther King, civil rights movement, and Mandela in the liberation movement in South Africa. She postulates that the response of anger to oppression is natural. However, for a leader to liberate the people from oppression, what follows after liberation is most important. Anger needs to be replaced by or transition into non-anger. In all three leaders, Gandhi, King, and Mandela, even if there were episodes of anger, they transitioned ultimately to no anger, which was critical in their strategies. They showed the strategic superiority of non-anger as it wins respect and friendship and eventually wins over adversaries, enlisting their cooperation in nation building. In this context, transition is crucial. Gandhi expressed outrage, but always in a forward-looking and in a spirit of non-anger. King expressed anger in speeches and encouraged it in his audiences, but always moved quickly to the transition to non-violence. King considered that violence could be morally justified only in self-defense. How did Mandela treat that in the South African case? Mandela, being a pragmatic politician, used non-violence as a tactic, not a principle. When he realized that non-violence was failing to give results, they wanted, that is the ANC, to force the apartheid regime to give up power and allow majority rule in South Africa. He led the ANC to give up the strategy of non-violence. But that did not mean he abandoned non-violence altogether. His resort to violence was also nuanced. The first major protest that the ANC, that is the African National Congress, organized was in 1958 during the general elections in South Africa, in which only 3 million whites could participate, but none of the rest 30 million Africans. The ANC organized a strike together with the South African Trade Union Congress against the racial nature of the election. As Mandela himself admits, it was based on the peaceful protest in 1946, which the Indian Congress had mounted based on Mahatma Gandhi's protest in South Africa in 1913, wherein peaceful rallies were arranged and he quoted arrest. This became a model for future protests in South Africa. In the treason trial, in which Mandela and others were charged for perpetuating violence, he deposed that he preached moderation and reaffirmed the ANC's commitment to non-violent struggle. He stated that democracy could be achieved through gradual reforms and added that for the demand of universal adult franchise, they were prepared to exert economic pressure to attain their demands. They would launch a defiance campaign and stay at home, either singly or together, until the government started negotiating. He further states that in the foreseeable future, then, it would be possible for them to achieve their demands through non-violence, and that they worked on the basis that the Europeans themselves can never remain indifferent to their demands, because they were hitting them in the stomach with their policy of economic pressure. He stated that the Europeans would respond to it, and indeed they were responding to it. A crucial question indeed arose in the ANC, whether the liberation movement should follow the Gandhian principle of non-violence, satyagraha. Some argued for non-violence purely on ethical grounds, noting that it was morally superior to any other method. Others argued that they should approach the issue not from the point of view of principles but tactics. They should employ the method demanded by the conditions prevailing. If a particular method or tactic enabled them to defeat the enemy, it should be used. The state was more powerful than the liberation movement, and any attempt to use violence by it would be crushed by the state. This meant that non-violence was a practical necessity than an option at the time. That view prevailed at that time. However, after the Sharpeville massacre in 1960, where 69 Africans were shot dead, some of them in the back, huge peaceful protests were launched by ANC. The government declared a state of emergency and banned, amongst others, the ANC, who were declared as illegal organizations. Mandela and others were arrested. Sharpeville came to be the turning point for Mandela and ANC to rethink their strategy of non-violence. In a meeting of the executive committee of the ANC held in 1961, the issue of non-violence as a strategy was discussed. The Indian group naturally preferred non-violence and argued the state would slaughter the liberation movement if they pursued the path of violence. According to one of them, the movement had failed on violence. Mandela countered, saying that non-violence had failed them. Ultimately, Congress authorized Mandela to go ahead and form a military organization separate from the ANC, which would not be under the direct control of ANC. The policy of the ANC would still be of non-violence, but they would use violence in a strategic manner. Most scholars, including Richard Stanger, agree that for Mandela, non-violence was a tactic, and when it did not work, it could be resorted to. It is important to note that Mandela was pursuing a strategy of violence, but he was acutely conscious of the fact that after the liberation, there would be consequences. So they considered 4 types of violent activities: sabotage, guerrilla warfare, terrorism, and open revolution. According to Mandela, for a small and a fledgling army, open revolution was not conceivable. Since the ANC had been reluctant to embrace violence, which form of violence to resort to was the question. The form of violence that inflicted the least harm against individuals was sabotage. Sabotage offered the best solution for future race relations. He was always conscious of what would happen after they succeeded. And that is very important, because it did not involve loss of life, offered the best hope for reconciliation among the races afterwards. They actually chose sabotage. They did not want to start a bloodbath between the whites and blacks. Mandela was acutely conscious of the impact of the strategy on race relations after liberation. So their strategy was to make selective actions against the military installations, etc. And this is how what is called MK, the armed wing, was formed. There was a clear direction that the MK would not indulge in civilian loss of life. But they also were aware that if sabotage did not work, they would also resort to other forms of violence. That is not to say that MK did not indulge in violence. There are cases in 1988 where civilians died, and there was a huge debate on that within the ANC. In this context, I want to tell you, Mandela embraced the Palestinian struggle. And it is notable in history for him to have embraced it and of contemporary relevance. In 1997, while he was still the president of South Africa, he said that the ANC struggle was ongoing. We know too well, he said, that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. That's a prophetic statement. In 1999, he visited Palestinian territories and Israel. He supported the two-state solution and called upon Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories. He even suggested that violence could be resorted to by Palestinians if peaceful progress was impossible. Decades later, last year, when South Africa approached the International Court of Justice alleging that Israel had committed and was committing genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, Justice Minister Ronald Ramola opened the South African statement before the ICJ with a quote from Mandela, which is, "In extending our hands from the miles to the people of Palestine, we do so with full knowledge that we are part of a humanity that is at one." In approaching the ICJ, the South African government continued the legacy of Mandela. In taking this step, President Ramaphosa and the South African government have to be congratulated for keeping Mandela's legacy alive. While Mandela did advocate for graded violence and would have undoubtedly strongly condemned Israel's military actions, the absence of structured violence by Hamas, particularly as evidenced in the terror attack of October 7, 2023, in which 1,195 people were killed, including 36 children, would definitely not have passed the muster with him. Very clear on that issue. Ultimately, he was imprisoned, as you know, 27 years after the Rivonia trial, along with others, and sentenced for life imprisonment, which he served in Robben Island and Portsmouth prison. The great thing about Mandela was, wherever he was, I must say, I've read quite a bit about Mandela. I've actually picked up things. His passion for justice, his persistence and patience with the opponents, something that lawyers have to learn. I learned that from reading quite a lot in the last 4 months. Wherever he was, he fought for justice and a just cause. He did not stop when he was banished to Robben Island. Even there he picked up and fought on issues of discrimination or hostility against the black people. From the first day in Robben Island, he protested against the discriminatory uniforms. You wouldn't believe, if you're black, the uniform is X. If you're white, it is Z. This is the level of, whites could wear full trousers and black people had to wear half trousers. It also reflected in his attitude to other prisoners. For example, he had no objection. Now, please appreciate this. I want to know whether Indian politicians would ever think of doing it. He was asked to clean, the old style of toilets. He was asked to clean the bucket of another prisoner. And he said, I'll do it. Without a murmur. I challenge you, not one politician in India will do it. Whichever party. Because of our caste system. It's a sad reflection. But that is the greatness of Mandela. He was a person down to earth. He also encouraged thinking in the future that if you have to negotiate with the Afrikaans oppressors, let's learn Afrikaans so that they would actually understand us much better. Being in jail for a very long period, Mandela obviously engaged in introspection. Anger in him was carefully pruned away. During meditation, he never seemed to have thought of making the white South Africans suffer or inflict on them any form of payback or harm. As he saw it, the goal was to change the system and not punish the oppressor or the invader. But that would require the cooperation of the whites. And at the very least, support from whites. Without the movement, we would become unstable and threatened. This would augur well for the period of negotiations with the apartheid regime, where anger had to transmit towards non-anger and respect for those who are the enemies. After being in Robben Island, he was shifted to Portsmouth prison in anticipation of the negotiations. Mandela explained that the ideological creed of ANC was and always been of African nationalism. What did that mean? Africans included everybody, not only blacks, whites, colored, so-called. He clarified that it was not the concept of African nationalism expressed in the cry, "Drive the white men into the sea," which was actually espoused by the rival political outfit, Pan-African National Congress. He reminisced that if he did not start dialogue soon, both sides would plunge into violence against each other. His solitude gave him opportunity to take the first steps in the direction of negotiations without the strict scrutiny of the ANC leadership that might destroy such efforts, according to him. The talks were held but derailed several times because of violence. However, Mandela made sure they continued. Despite ongoing violence, talks moved ahead. It was to the credit of Mandela that they continued, and ultimately, to cut the long story short, the interim constitution came into place. Dates for the first election were set. Ashili Mbebe rightly points out that it was the ability and genius of Mandela to transition from violence to diplomacy which led to a negotiated settlement. On 2nd February 1990, after de Klerk took over president, as Madiba himself notes, de Klerk stood before parliament and he truly began to dismantle apartheid and laid the ground for democratic South Africa. He also lifted the ban on political parties and freed political prisoners as well as other measures. On 3rd February 1990, Mandela was released. The interim constitution was adopted in 1993 and it came into effect on 27 April 1994 when the democratic elections were held. On May 10, 1994, the new interim government was sworn in with Mandela as its first president. Now, very importantly, the final constitution was adopted on 8th of May 1996 and signed into law on 10 December 1996 and brought into force in 4th February 1997. A word about the Constitution of South Africa. Is one of the most radical, progressive, democratic and transformative in nature. As lawyers would know, under international law, there is a distinction between civil and political rights. Right to be arrested in a particular way, not to be detained. These are civil and political rights. And what are called economic, social and cultural rights, which are health rights. And under international law, and most constitutions, including India, civil and political rights, which are contained in our Chapter 3 Fundamental Rights, are immediately enforceable. But economic, social and cultural rights, like right to health, are not enforceable. They are progressively realizable. But in the South African Constitution, they are actually enforceable at law. That's a very big distinction. I'll talk about that later. But a word about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Mandela was very keen that after achieving liberation in South Africa, it should transition from apartheid society to a non-racial, not multiracial, which is a different concept, society with all racial and ethnic communities being treated equally as and also being able to contribute to the development of the nation. The challenge was to ensure that persistent violence did not result in bloodshed. This was sought to be achieved in two ways. One was Mandela himself using his standing in South Africa to foster better relations between the white and black South Africans. Mandela and the ANC leadership, Chris Hani and Joe Slovo especially, sent the right signals from the administration to the people to see that bloodshed is avoided. The other was through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You just heard the national anthem. I also didn't know. I asked Cedric, is it the national anthem, which is mixed? You have to appreciate that earlier the anthem, national anthem, was actually by the Afrikaans. That was hated by the black people and the radical and the communists, etc. They had their own anthem, Nkosi, and the Afrikaans was Die Welt. Mandela's solution for reconciliation was to make a hybrid national anthem. So the first part is actually Nkosi, then it goes to Die Welt, that is his imagination to get the people together. Similarly, he was a sportsman. He knew what sports were about. Sports were on racial lines. We see South African cricketers today with lots of black people and very good bowlers. But earlier there were no black people. It's all racial. But because he was a sportsman and he knew he has to use his stature and examples, he actually made sure that the rugby team, which was all white, understands their role. And he was able to foster a paternal relationship with them so that they actually could win. They taught black young Africans rugby, and he became the paternal father for them. Ultimately, the South African actually beat New Zealand in a rugby team, and Mandela came to the field with the shirt wearing jersey number 9. And all the white people clapped. That was his beauty. He could use his imagination for these things. Now, apart from this, there was a need, because there had been so much killing by the oppressors, and even by the ANC to some extent, there was a need for accountability. And that has been traditionally done by what are known as Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. Argentina and Chile had tried it. South Africa also tried it. The idea was that a person who was the perpetrator would speak the truth and tell a story about his actions in violating human rights. And the victims would get justice, reparations, etc. So that happened. In fact, there were a large number of commission's hearings, initially televised live, and later on, not televised. So during its operation from 1996, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa till 2002 held over 2,500 hearings. It is still ongoing. But there has been quite a lot of criticism about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. and that's true for other commissions also in Chile and Argentina, that they are more prone to granting amnesty than promoting justice to the victims. Fortunately, because of the system, the justice system in South Africa, victims groups have gone to the court seeking more justice. There's also been the criticism that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission actually provided an opportunity to unpack or deconstruct racism amongst the white people. But not enough was done. And as a result, even today, racist attitudes amongst the whites actually persist and are being deepened and will endure for a very long time. This is a challenge for the South African government. It's not an easy thing. Take an example in India. We have a constitution where reservation for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, other backward castes are actually ingrained in the constitution. But has the caste system broken down? Is it not more rigid? What about religion? Today we are actually going backwards in India. These are issues which have to be dealt very sensitively and persistently. So there's a very big issue that racism was not tackled. But most importantly, Truth and Reconciliation Commission was able to again further avoid bloodshed. So instead of the person who was a victim gunning for the white people or even the ANC members, they had a platform to secure justice. And Mandela and other leaders of the ANC were able to, through communications, reconcile warring factions and bring about a resolution to the dispute. Now, the last point I want to make is that of equality. Now, Mandela had deposed that the ANC always stood for a non-racial, not multiracial democracy, and they shrank from any action which might drive races further apart than they already were. He said that the Africans wanted a just share in the whole of South Africa. They wanted security and stake in society. Above all, they wanted political rights. This is what the ANC was fighting for. In his deposition in the Rivonia trial, Mandela also stated that he understood the state of black South Africans in South Africa, terrible disparities between the black and the white, in education, health, income, every aspect of life, where black Africans existed barely at a subsistence level, and the whites at the highest standards in the world, and aimed at keeping that way. The blacks were poor in comparison with whites in South Africa, and it was the state which actually prevented that from actually changing. Now, during the early days of the ANC, there was what was called the Freedom Charter, which was actually the agenda of ANC. And according to Mandela, it was the most important political and revolutionary document ever adopted by the ANC, which called upon the people of South Africa to live in brotherhood, enjoy equal rights, opportunities, and stressed that only in a democratic state, based on the view of the people, to secure to all birthright without distinction of color and race and sex, it envisaged that it could not be achieved without radically altering the economic and political structure of South Africa. It emphasized that the people shall share in the country's wealth, and the national wealth of the country, the heritage of all South Africans, should be restored to the people. The mineral wealth beneath the soil, the banks and the monopoly industry shall be transferred to the ownership of the people as a whole, and that all industries shall assist in the well-being of the people. This is a clear-cut program of equality, both at the political, social level as well as at the economic level. Unfortunately, the dream of Mandela, after the liberation movement succeeded, on economic equality, whether it's wealth or income, has remained unfulfilled. At the time of liberation, black persons had only 13% of the land in terms of ownership and possession, though constituting 81% of the population. There's been a lot of efforts by the government to change that, but it's woefully slow. Even today, in terms of wealth, 10%, largely the whites, own 80% of the wealth. Despite a lot of efforts in terms of job creation, unemployment has been increasing. Coupled with COVID, etc., over 30% in this decade and over 60% in the youth. So there's a huge challenge for the government. More importantly, there is strong correlation between race and privilege on class lines. There is criticism that not enough has been done to tackle this racial inequality. Though there has been redistribution of land and agriculture holdings, progress has been very slow. Large amount of agriculture holdings are still in white hands. There's a proposal now to have equitable access to land bill being passed. But things are going on very slowly, according to a lot of critics. Though government has also taken measures to have black ownership and the development of the black middle class, again the pace has been quite slow. On the health front, there has been progress. The South African government needs to be commended for continuing to provide ARV treatment for HIV positive people to 6.8 million people living with HIV. However, this will be disrupted and has been partially disrupted by the new policies of the US president. Now, as I said, the South African constitution, unlike other constitutions and international treaties, makes economic, social and cultural rights enforceable. However, like most developing countries, this has not been taken on board by the South African state. The South African Constitutional Court has pointed this out repeatedly, but with little effect. I hope measures are taken in this respect. Mark Haywood, a close friend of mine, of the Nelson Mandela School of Governance at the University of Cape Town, has pointed out this aspect forcibly in his article on the same issue. Criticism has also been leveled that this is due to adopting liberal market economics from the time of liberation and following the agenda of international institutions, including the World Bank and IMF, at the behest of Western countries, which has led to the present state of economic affairs. Perhaps because of this strategy, there was no attempt to seek alternative models to pursue, say, goals of self-reliance in development of industry with the cooperation of, say, BRICS countries in terms of setting up state enterprises or joint collaborations in setting up industry, which would be opposed by Western multinational companies and capitalist enterprises and their governments. In this context, one area which I'm familiar with in South Africa is access to medicines. During the height of the HIV crisis in South Africa, at the dawn of the present millennium, HIV retrovirals were being sold in South Africa and elsewhere at $10,000 per patient per annum. We can't afford it. The Western multinationals, pursuant to the change in the law, which allowed for generic competition by way of importation and compulsory license, were challenged by the Western multinationals. The Medicine Related Controlled Substances Act would have allowed generic industry to sell medicines at a very cheap rate. But the Western multinationals, 27 of them, challenged the law and its amendment in the South African court. It took civil society all over the world to demonstrate, protest, and say this is not on. Ultimately, it shamed the Western MNCs and they withdrew their suit challenging that. More importantly, as opposed to $10,000 per patient per year, the Western, which was done by Western companies, the Indian generic companies came in, and Dr. Hamid of Cipla, who was there in the Durban conference in 2000, actually offered to sell those same medicines, of course generic versions, at $700 per patient per year. What did that mean? Huge savings in costs. And the quality of drugs was as good as the patented drugs. Now, because of that, generic drugs being available, there was huge saving in cost for the South African government. The cost of the generics was 1%, literally, less than 1% of the multinationals. Of course, the multinationals brought the price down to the equal level of the generics because they were making huge, what I call criminal profits. Now, that was an opportunity, not only for South Africa, but for other countries to set up collaborative efforts, to have joint enterprises with Indian or Brazilian or other generic companies around in the developing countries. That opportunity was lost. As a special rapporteur, I had gone to Uganda. Cipla had set up a subsidiary selling medicines, ARVs, at a very low cost. But the problem was that the Western multinationals would sell the drug at a much lower rate. And they were not being supported either by the Ugandan government or by the Indian government. So you need to have a strategy. You need to have a strategy, especially after what happened in COVID, where the Western world showed their true face, and they're showing their true face with Trump. They're not bothered about any altruistic motives. They are bothered only about profit and money. What should you do? You should actually think of strategies which will help the developing countries to set up industry, provide work to the workers, train them. And that strategy is viable even today. My friend Biswajit Dar and my friends from the UN are just sitting here. They know. That should be tried. There should be an effort by the South African government, supported by the Indian government, actively, proactively, not leaving it to industry, to set up joint enterprises in South Africa, starting with pharmaceuticals, starting with ITs, setting up colleges in South Africa by Indian institutes. Where did the ITs come from in India? We didn't set them up. Who set them up? It was set up by technology and education from outside. That has to be done. So you provide training, you provide opportunities. This is the way out. We will have capital entering into South Africa. If anything that COVID taught us, that it is that you cannot rely on Western nations for your survival. You look at what is happening today. From long time ago, who has been our closest associate in terms of war? Russia. You may not like Russia for whatever reason, but they have supported you without a hitch for more than 70 years. And you go and rely on the US, who dished you at the first effort, and they're thinking of tariffs of God knows how much. You have to rethink your strategy. I'm glad that the BRICS are getting together again, and I hope that impetus will actually increase for these type of efforts. So I want to conclude that Mandela had unquestioned legacies, which I would say are etched in stone. First, I would say he was a patient, persistent, passionate, and a persuasive man with a lot of humility and friendship. For the oppressed people seeking liberation, and that's happening all over the world. It's not over. Non-violence should be the first resort. But if it fails, graded violence is available. But death of civilians have to be avoided. During the struggle, effort should be made to start negotiations in a friendly manner to avoid bloodshed. After the liberation, it is important to have a mechanism which actually looks into the violations of human rights, justice to victims, reparations, etc., and pardon to those who have spoken the truth about their perpetrating human rights violations. But there is a weakness that I pointed out about the economic trajectory that Mandela and the ANC leadership have taken. I am saying this with all humility as a fraternal supporter of the National Liberation Movement in South Africa. I was associated with it in England, and I used to attend lots of meetings of ANCs and support them from outside. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Groover. I think we should give him a standing ovation. He deserves it. On that powerful lecture on Madiba. A lawyer speaking about another lawyer. I'm tempted to abuse this opportunity to say a few words about the impact, the profound impact that Madiba had on me as someone who's a former oppressed. You alluded to this concept. I'm just copying what you said. Especially when you alluded to education, his education. In 1995, okay, in my village in Limpopo province, where I hail from, we had an Indian family that lived there for many, many years in the 80s. So to us, Indians, it's not new for me because we grew up with them in the village. So they had a shop, this Indian family. So when they left village in 1995, moving back to Pretoria where they came from, they left a gift to the villagers in the form of a library. So I walked into the library. I was doing matric. Early January, I walked into the library. I picked up my book, Madiba, Long Walk to Freedom. The book changed my whole life. In fact, had it not been that book, I was not going to pass matric because I did not have light. I thought I was poor. But after reading Madiba, who came from, people think Madiba came from a rich family because he came from royal family. No, the kings were very poor because they were dispossessed of their land. So I read that book. I was able to get inspired and pass matric, eventually went to go to the university and become a diploma today. It was because of him and that Indian family in my village. Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Cedric Crowley, who is actually my boss. Dr. Borker, you are not fair. You want me to lose my job. Mr. Crowley is a minister plenipotentiary in our embassy, in our High Commission. He plays a pivotal role in advancing South Africa's diplomatic and strategic interest in India, particularly in the areas of political cooperation, cultural exchange, and multilateral engagement, as a multilateralist himself. Known for his clarity of thought, collaborative leadership, and deep commitment to South-South relations, Mr. Crowley brings both institutional insight and personal conviction to his work. Indeed, we look forward to his reflections this evening as we honor the legacy of Nelson Mandela. Mr. Crowley, you have the stage.
Namaskar. Good evening. Wonderful to be among friends this evening. And let me assure you, Program Director, your job is safe. We are a government ruled by the rule of law. You are protected. Unlike the experiences we had when people could fire you, dismiss you, violate you without any consequence. And so it was wonderful to be invited today on this day that has been declared by the United Nations as Nelson Mandela International Day, in honor for the 67 years that he spent in public life. And what he's called for is that we spend 67 minutes of our own lives and contribute towards the betterment of society. So on this day, we were quite busy, and the school that performed here, Bluebells and Springdales in particular, these are two schools, and it was wonderful to see them participate in the program. Two schools that demonstrated solidarity with the South African population, and particularly with the African National Congress. They wrote poems to Mandela, they wrote letters and reflections. And that is the power of one. And Professor Borker, I would encourage you to continue to involve the students as you did this morning when 300 students participated in the program. So what am I to do? We've had such a wonderful speaker, High Commissioner, sitting here, who knew Mandela, who sat in his company. What more can I add about this giant? But I hope you'll tolerate me. You've been so patient and listened so quietly and attentively. And so let me also abuse this moment by giving a few reflections. High Commissioner Mukherjee and I reflected on Nelson Mandela and what he meant. And I think the one outstanding point that High Commissioner reflected on was his humility and his service towards others. That here was a man, and High Commissioner told me that there were only two men that could call Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, and that was Mandela and Prince Philip. And he was the only man that went without a jacket, only in his Madiba shirt, and addressed Her Majesty. But that was the kind of person he was, a very humble person. You know, in the reflections that were presented, the virtues of law was espoused and communicated in terms of the current constitution. But if you juxtapose that against the lack of law, I would say and argue, that existed within apartheid South Africa, it's quite contradictory that you can use law to advance society and protect the human rights of individuals. But as my country has shown, you can also use law to oppress, subjugate others that are not like you. And so yesterday at school, it was Bluebells where we were yesterday. They were asking me, what made Mandela different? Because they look at the headlines on the news today, they read in papers today of a world in which human rights is abused daily. Wars are fought daily. People are killed daily. Walls are erected daily to separate us in the year 2025. Can you imagine that? That after the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we are now moving backwards. The promises of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which was a promissory note that no one shall be left behind, that governments will make every effort to ensure that poverty is eradicated, at least halved, that there will be healthcare, that the population, the climate will be taken care of. We are reversing those advances we've made. What we've decided to do is to increase our defense spending, to prepare for war, instead of fighting the war against poverty and inequality. And so I think Mandela today would have been very disappointed to live in this period, in this time, where people are oppressed and robbed of their inalienable right to dignity and development. as indicated by the speaker, we have a very progressive constitution, one that celebrates both political and economic and health rights of everyone is respected. But those rights must be realized in a world where the imbalances still persist, where the rules for trade is still skewed to advance and protect the developed countries. And you see it, that powerful countries can announce that we will impose this tariff against the regulations, the rules of the World Trade Organization. So we are moving away from this rules-based international trading system. But at any rate, I am digressing. I wanted to also indicate that the two parallels, since we have lawyers here today, between our two countries and the histories, and I reflect on Mr. Gandhi, that came to South Africa as a barrister. He was suffering, he suffered the same consequences of this discriminatory laws, and that has propelled him to become an activist. And so he created a political party, and his theories on satyagraha was developed. And so we think when he returned to India, our country has contributed to your independence because he successfully engaged in liberating you from the colonial oppression from the British. So I think we've contributed in some small measure because of that experience of injustice. So that's how a lawyer used the experience to advance whole society. You know, and you repay that favor because you were the first country to impose sanctions against us, to reference the human rights abuses against black people in the UN in 1946, to impose comprehensive sanctions, economic sanctions, and to assist materially the liberation movement. So that solidarity is something that we appreciate and that we should continue to build as India and South Africa. That solidarity finds expression in our bilateral relations, but also multilaterally through our collaboration in IPSA, in BRICS, in the G20, in our fight for justice, to ensure that the legal instruments that exist within the WTO are used to ensure, during the time of COVID, that the intellectual property rights that are protected by, that are used to protect the privilege of the pharmaceuticals, that we use the instruments to ensure that others can use generic medicine to protect the lives of others. You know, there was the slogan, no one is safe until everyone is safe. Do you remember that? I think the UN said it, and many, many countries said it. But what did we find in practice? That vaccines were awarded in those countries, in the north, in the main. It was countries of the south, including India, that made these vaccines available. So you see, at some level, there's this claim that human rights are important, but it has been instrumentalized and politicized. As long as our rights are protected, it doesn't matter what happens in the South. And so when countries, emerging economies gather and create institutions like BRICS, they see it as a threat. And no one said that BRICS is a threat or is in opposition to any of the existing systems or individuals or countries. BRICS is a natural expression of solidarity among countries in the South. It is a reflection that power is being dispersed, that no one country is in a position where they can dictate and dominate. And therefore, multilateralism has to be protected. But we are using organizations like the BRICS that are advancing collaboration and cooperation, whether it is in healthcare, whether it's in ICT, whether it is in education, the protection of women and the advancement of their rights. That is what BRICS is all about. And so I think that the collaboration that existed between our countries in our fight against, for independence and for liberation should continue. Sometimes I don't know who to support when we are on the cricket field, though. And you know that last game that was played here in India, where we almost won against you, you remember, you recall? I was even thinking I must phone the Joint Secretary and really sympathize that we broke the hearts of 1.4 billion people. And then you turned that game around and you beat us. Today I stand before you as the representative of the world champions in the test series, in the test version of that same game. So you can see how you, through your IPL, has even lifted our game. We are playing much better cricket these days. So that's thanks to you, and that shows how South-South collaboration can work to our benefit through healthy competition. Let me conclude by reflecting on Mandela. And I was thinking, which theory in political science or in terms of leadership can guide us in terms of what we should do? Because there's such a poverty in terms of global leadership. And as the student once asked me, so how do we ensure that there are more Mandelas in this world? And what characteristics should one exhibit and have and possess to become great like him? And I could not answer that question. I had to reflect, and I think I mentioned something like he was selfless and he was fighting for justice, but I don't think that tells the whole story. I think if we try to develop theoretical frameworks of understanding Mandela, we will be at a loss. Because he's too complex, he's too layered as an individual. But there's one thing I think that could explain it potentially. And that is that Mandela loved deeply. It is as simple as that. Mandela loved deeply. Why? What manner of a man is it that would tell a court that has all the power in the world to sentence him to death, that the cause of justice and equality he will fight? And if it has to be, he is prepared to die for that cause. What manner of a man is that? What gain will he get by dying? And that shows me the selflessness that he had. Mandela had compassion. You know, all these other things flow from love. If you have love, you have compassion. And that's why he could embrace the prisoner. You know, one of the chief guests at these, I know the Indian community like this word chief guest. So one of the chief guests at Mandela's inauguration was, do you know who? The very prisoner, prison guard on Robben Island that had to look after him and sometimes discipline him was there. Because what did Mandela do? He asked he came to know that guard at a personal level. He asked him about his family. He knew when the children were writing exams. And so when he became president, he invited that guard. And that guard must have been shocked. Because here you have the commander-in-chief of the South African Defense Force, who had power over all the machinery of government that could be utilized against those that oppressed him. He could have used that to say, this is our time for revenge. But he showed and demonstrated that he embraced our diversity because he believed that even the whites were oppressed. That he truly believed that it was not only us as blacks that were oppressed, but because you oppressed as whites, You can't be free. And it's only when we are all liberated that you can enjoy your freedom. That was his philosophy. Mandela loved children. I think he was more comfortable in the company of those children than in the corridors of power, sitting with Her Majesty, sitting with his royal. Mandela wanted to engage with children, and he used to serve. Ask High Commissioner Mukherjee. You would be surprised when you visit him and he stands up to serve you tea. So he was a servant leader. You know, sometimes I get the sense that people want to do certain things in order to gain fame and get rewards, whether it's the Nobel laureate, people positioning themselves to say, you know, I should be qualifying for the Nobel laureate. Look at what I'm doing. The problem is Mandela did those things effortlessly, without expecting anything. But you know, Mandela was also strong. You know, when you look at him, you think that, oh man, he compromised here, he did this. But if you are an individual that must tell a nation, that an angry nation at that, because there were so many millions of people, thousands of people killed, even during the period after he's released. So there was an indignation and there was an anger in the community. Now you tell them they must embrace whites. What the hell is wrong with you, Mandela? Those are the arguments that the people on the ground would have. How dare you tell us that we must embrace our enemies, that we must create peace and live in harmony with them? It takes a strong person, doesn't it? To change the views, the thinking of people. And so I believe in the power of one. If Mandela, if Gandhiji, if they could have done it, Martin Luther King, small individuals, one at a time, working with communities, they changed societies and they changed the world. So let us continue this legacy of selfless service, spread the message of love. Because, you know, this poverty that we face, Mandela believed in it fundamentally. It's created by humans. There's nothing that predetermines that there should be poverty in this world. It is the systems that we have that creates that. So let us continue to, in his honor, fight to eradicate poverty, fight for a just world, fight for the liberation of Palestinians, and for peace to prevail everywhere. If we succeed in doing that, then we would have done justice to his memory. So I thank you all, and I appreciate the moment I have been granted to speak to you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crowley. You know, after your boss has spoken, the only thing you can say is to say we have come to the end of our session tonight. But however, because Madiba himself was a great man, I want to conclude this with this quotation. He once said, "What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others." May tonight gathering inspire us to make that difference in our communities, in our institutions, in our hearts. Thank you very much for being part of this celebration. Let us continue to walk the long road to freedom together.